Beit Hamikdash, we went ahead and there was a room that there was a fire burning all the time for the Kohanim to warm themselves up. And our Gemara was talking about before Shabbat, when you want to go ahead and light some of the wood before Shabbat, the Mishnah said, "Shedei kedei shetochas ha'or berubo." The Mishnah stated that you have to go ahead and light the fire, has to catch to the majority, which the Gemara will explain. And we also said in the Mishnah regarding bread, Ein notnim pat, if you want to go ahead and bake bread before Shabbat, it has to be baked a certain amount so that you won't come to stoke the coals on Shabbat. As you know, there's a great concern that people shouldn't stoke the coals on Shabbat. And therefore, the Mishnah stated that you cannot go ahead and put this bread into the oven before dark unless the sufficient time for the bottom to crust, to form a crust while it is still day, while it is still before Shabbat. Once it reached that level that the bottom crusted, then we're not concerned that you're going to come to stoke the coals, because already, good morning, Adam. And Ralph was trying to send to the group. I don't know if he was able to go through. If
No,
not,
it wasn't.
If you want to send to the group that want, welcome back. So that's the question. Just like we spoke about on Shabbat, how much, if you're going to go ahead and put food on a fire before Shabbat, God bless you, how much does it have to already cook before Shabbat in order for us not to be concerned that you're going to come to stoke the coals? Beforehand, we were talking about roasting. If you were roasting the meat, we said that as long as it's enough, if it was enough that it roasted either a third or a half before Shabbat, that would be sufficient. When it comes to cooking food before Shabbat, we're going to see there's a major discussion. How much of the food has to be cooked before Shabbat? Does it have to be completely cooked and not improving? Is that's reached that level, or even also a third or a half? That we'll see more as we see in the Gemara. Now we're talking about the einot ninet pat. You can't place the bread into the oven unless the bottom will crust. Now the question is, what is the Gemara wants to identify? What is the bottom of the bread that you're referring to? Because as you know, in those days they would take dough and they would stick it to the end of the wall of the oven. So is the bottom of the bread, meaning the lower part, means the part that stuck against the wall, which is not facing the fire, and that will obviously take longer time to crust than the outside part? Is that what we're referring to when we say the tachton? Is that the bottom part? That's the Gemara's question in the yeshiva. Good morning, Simon. Iboyulahu. Tachton. What is the tachton? What is the lower part that we're referring to? Heich de gabetano. Is it referring to the one we are in 28.1? 28.1, right side, right, David? Right column, 28.1, Ibayulu, in the yeshiva. They had the following question.
It's a method they put it on the wall.
Yeah, they stuck it into the pasted on the wall, and then I presume because of the heat, it was able to stick. Then it took time, imagine you take dough and you heat up an oven, you stick dough against the wall, right? So stick to the wall. Morning, Ronnie. They still do it today. That's it.
Iraqi pizza, those big ones.
They stick it to the wall of it, and they stick it to the wall. But they have that like scrapers. How do you like that? That's nothing has changed in 2,000 years.
It's a special bread. It's those big.
That's a round pita. That's how they made the bread 2,000 years ago. So what did they do, Simon? They heat up the oven first, most probably. The oven is hot, and they put the fire on the bottom. That's exactly the story. That's exactly the case of 2,000 years. Nothing has changed in this for this Iraqi pita. How do you like that, Ralph and Ronnie? We're rare places. It's not the commonplace.
I would have thought it'd been the other way. I
What'd
would have
you say?
thought I would have thought it would have been the bottom of it.
Right, but this is the way. This is the original. This is how they did it 2,000 years ago. So they have to heat the oven. They stick the dough on the wall of the oven. And that's the question of our Gemara, Simon. And it's delicious. So the question is it referring to the side? Let's say this side is against this is against the wall of the oven. Is it referring to this side crusting, or this side that's facing the fire? Which bottom is it referring to has the crust?
Well, where's
Here,
the fire coming from? It's coming from the bottom, isn't it?
going from the bottom, right? But we said that the tachton, that the bottom of the bread. So is the bottom of the bread is that the part that's facing it's like on the bottom because it's a bottom, it's lower, it's facing the fire. Is that called the bottom? Or the bottom is the bottom meaning the side that's facing the wall of the oven? Do we mean heich de gabi tanur? Or dilma do we mean tachton regarding heich de gabi ha'or, facing the fire? Now,
It says
so
the
if
bottom
you look,
is the surface that's facing the fire.
right, so that's the question. What does the bottom what does the bottom mean? If you look at 10, they say exactly what Simon says, that in the Mishnah, in certain parts of the world today, is that the bread was baked by pasting the dough to the inner walls of the oven. It is therefore, when you say the bottom surface, is it this bottom, because this is the bottom side, because the front is the bottom referred to the part that's against the wall of the oven, which will be the bottom of the bread after, and then they say that, but that will be the bottom of the bread after it's baked, because if they're referring to the part against the wall of the oven, that means this is the top and this is the bottom. It just is stuck. You put something against here, and now this is the top, and this is the other side is the bottom, right? If I stick, this is the top, and that's the bottom. If it's going about towards, if it's referring to the part on the wall is the bottom compared to this. This is that will be the bottom of the bread after it's baked, because the outside of the bread is going to be the top, and this is the bottom, or is it the outer surface which faces downwards towards the fire at the time of the baking? So what are we referring to when we say the tachton? So the Gemara says, Toshma, come in here. Rabbi Eliezer says, Kadesh Yikru Paneh Hamudubokim Betanor. It's the face what has the crust? The part that's facing the wall, that's attached to the wall, which means it's a larger amount of time, because the part that's facing the fire, that's open to the fire, it's not against the wall, that crusts much faster than the part that is stuck to the wall. Because when it's stuck to the wall, the heat has to go through. It has a set. The heat has to go. The fire has to also crust onto that part that's stuck into the wall, and that will take longer. So that's what the Gemara answers the question. When we say the bottom, we're referring to the part that's attached to the wall. So the Gemara continues. The Gemara says, Mishal Shalisa Pesach. We go ahead and we lower the Pesach. We said when it comes to the Korban Pesach, we contrasted other roasting of other foods to the roasting of a Korban Pesach. We said when it comes to roasting foods, we said it has to reach the level of a third or a half. And Shulchan Aruch is strict, and they take the half. For Shabbat, they want to be strict, like the Rambam's opinion, that in order for you, if you're roasting the food before Shabbat, it has to already have reached its half. Say it again. Right. Once you reach the half of roasted, we're not afraid you're going to poke the. You can leave it there. Right. That's the opinion of the Gemara. So that, but yet when it comes to the Korban Pesach, we said that it does not need to reach that level of a half or a third when you're roasting the Korban Pesach. Rather, you just need to put it in before Shabbat. Just get that Korban Pesach, that meat from the lamb, the seh, and you go ahead and you put the meat in right before Shabbat, meaning Friday night. The first Seder was Friday night that year, and Friday afternoon you slaughtered the korban, and the roasting of the korban, you're not allowed to roast it on Shabbat. You can't roast the Pesach on Shabbat, but you could go ahead but as long as you put it into the oven before Shabbat, you're good. You got it into the oven before Shabbat, then there's no problem. Even if, let's say, Shabbat was 8 o'clock, let's say sunset was 8 o'clock, you got it in at 5 to 8, you're good. Now 5 to 8, it's not going to be a third or a half roasted before Shabbat. So the Gemara wants to understand, why are you allowed to go ahead and do that with the Korban Pesach? Why is the Korban Pesach different than my regular meat that I would readily make on every Friday? Where if I want to roast that meat, I might gotta make sure I have it at least a third or half roasted before the Shabbat, in order that I won't come to poke around on Shabbat and increase the fire, make a fire by mistake. Why is the Korban Pesach different? So the Gemara is my timer. So the Gemara says, "V'shum de b'nei chabura zrizinheim." The members of the group are very diligent. They're on top of their game, and they're going to remind each other. Meaning, because you have a number of people that are going to be eating from this korban. Every person has to eat one kazayit, one olive size, like about 1 ounce of meat. So there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be eating from this big piece of meat, and therefore they're going to be, and being that they're on the group, for the korban, they're careful, and they'll remind each other that they won't come to stoke the coals. Now, people, when people are involved, some explain that when you're involved in an offering, you're much more on top of your game. We find that, like the Cohen brothers,
Probably gonna go early
David
and help
Cohen, the
Remy.
Kohanim, we say that Kohanim are zrizim. We say the Kohanim are very diligent. That's why even when it's raining, David's here at the shul, because the Kohanim are diligent, right? They move very fast. They're very swift. Kohanim zrizim hein, and therefore they're on top of their game. So too, we're saying over here that people are involved when you're involved in an offering, you're much more on top of your game. You're much more focused, and therefore you'll be careful. You remind each other not to go ahead and stoke the coals. So the Gemara says, "Halavachi." If it wouldn't be for the fact that the members of the group are diligent, what would we say? Lo, we would not allow you to go ahead and lower the meat into the fire, to barbecue your korban. We would not have allowed you to do it at 5 to 8. The only reason why we allow you to do it at 5 to 8, right before Shabbat, is because the people that are involved in the korban are going to be very careful and diligent and make sure to remind each other not to go and stoke the coals. But the Gemara says, even if it would not be that, even if it would not be a korban, even not be an offering, we learned earlier, a gadya, the meat of a goat, and that's the meat of a korban pesach, that's roasted in an oven. We said if the oven, whether the oven is the opening of the oven is closed sealed with some sort of clay or not sealed, you're allowed to go ahead and put the food in the oven. Why did we say that? We said because the meat of a goat is very soft. If you're going to go ahead and open up the oven before it's roasted, the wind that will come in will have a negative effect on the meat, and because of its tenderness. Therefore, we said you could go ahead and we said you could leave the food of the goat that's roasting in the oven, even if it's not sealed, because we're not afraid you're going to come to stoke it. Now, the korban pesach, the Pesach offering is from this type of meat. And therefore, since it's this type of meat, so why do we have to say that it's because the people are diligent? The Gemara says, Mar says, Gadya, a goat, a sheep, this type of animal, being shrik, being low shrik, warning asaf, whether the oven walls, the opening of the oven is sealed or not sealed with clay, shapid dami, you could go ahead and put the meat in. So because we're not afraid you're going to go ahead and stoke it. So that's the Gemara's question. Why is what's the problem? There shouldn't be a problem, even if people would not be on top of the game, even if it would not be for a korban, even if they wouldn't be diligent, there shouldn't be a problem because nobody's going to open it up. Even if it's any person preparing the meat, even people who are not part of the group on the korban pesach. So the Gemara says, that, you know what? It depends. Was the pieces of meat of the goat, of the lamb, was it? Remember the korban pesach was from the animal was less than a year old, the first year of its life. It's a very young, soft, tender meat. So therefore, what's the concern? Even if they would not be members of a group for an offering, there shouldn't be a concern. So the Gemara says, Hatam. The Gemara says Hatam. The allowance of roasting the meat of a goat, where we said that the wind, that even if it's not sealed, the opening of the oven, meaning you don't need the opening of the oven to be sealed to make sure you won't open it on Shabbat, right? Some meat, we said that if you seal it, so then you're not going to come to stoke it because you sealed it with some clay around it. But here we say when it comes to tender goat meat, you don't have to seal it because you're not going to open up because it will ruin the meat, the wind. So the Gemara says that's talking about mintach. That's talking about goat or tender meat. That's what? That's cut up into pieces. And because it's cut up into pieces, so then doesn't have so much weight on it. Doesn't have so much weight on it, it can't withstand the wind. The wind will have a negative effect. However, but the way of Al-Hachabar in the Mishnah, the Korban Pesach, the Pesach offering wasn't little pieces cut into little pieces of meat. Lo mintach, because they would roast it whole. They would roast it whole after they would remove its skin. Like the pasuk says, Rosho al Kra'av al Kirbo. It was roasted as a large piece together. Since it's a large piece, so now it has a lot of weight. Something has a lot of weight, the wind will not have a negative effect. The wind won't have a negative effect, so then really you should be concerned if you just put it in 5 to 8. maybe you're going to come to stoke it. Why aren't we concerned? Because the people are on top of their game. But the people of Bnei Chabura, they're part of a group that are working on the korban, on the offering, and because they're a group working on the offering, they're going to be careful and they're diligent. Because they're diligent, they're not going to come to stoke the coals. But if it would not be for that reason, then there would have been a problem. Okay. So the Gemara says, "Umachizin et ha'or." We said in the Beit HaMoked, we said in this room that they had for heat for the Kohanim. We said that beautiful, fascinating thing, how they were concerned about the Kohanim shouldn't catch a cold. The Kohanim should be comfortable. And David was walking around without shoes and socks in the Beit HaMikdash. So we had to go ahead and so there was a room for David to warm up his feet. And we said last week, because there should not be any chatzitza. We learned out from a certain pasuk, there should not be any separation between the body of the Kohen and the ground. Therefore, the Kohen did not have shoes and socks on. But so they had this.
Did they even have socks in those days?
Yeah, I would think so. Some
Okay.
sort of something.
Hmm.
So the Gemara says, and in order, when you want to go ahead and light the fire in that room for the wood, so the Gemara says that if you're doing it before Shabbat, so the Mishnah says you have to make sure that the fire took hold of the majority of the wood. Now we have to understand, what does it mean majority? Does majority mean we have to see what does it mean majority of the wood? We'll see. The Gemara is going to explain now what is this? What is it? It says the Machazin Esa'ar Berubo. 1 second. Sorry, let's excuse myself. When it comes to the Beit HaMoked, when it comes to the outside the Beit HaMikdash, you would have to go ahead and have to catch majority. But in the Beit HaMikdash itself, we said you don't even need the majority, any amount, because in the Beit HaMikdash the Kohanim were there, and the Kohanim would be careful to make sure, and we don't have to worry about the Kohanim stoking the coals, right? So there's a contrast between the Beit HaMikdash, just as long as you got a little bit lit in the Beit HaMikdash, you're not afraid that the Kohanim, because who's in the room? Who goes into that room? The Kohanim. They're not going to stoke it because the Kohanim are very diligent. So therefore, you only have to just make sure a little bit has to be on before Shabbat. But outside the Beit HaMikdash, you got to get majority. The Gemara's going to now. So the Gemara says, "Menani mile." How do we know this law regarding lighting the fire for this room for the Kohanim, that we say you could go in and just light it right before Shabbat? Right before Shabbat, you light it. 5 minutes to 8, just light it. Don't worry about it, even though it's not the majority caught on fire. Rav Huna says, there's a pasuk in the Torah. Lo tevaru eish b'chol moshvotechem. You're not allowed to go ahead and make a fire in all your places, wherever you are, on the Shabbat. The Torah says you can't make a fire, right? You can't make a fire. You can't scratch a match together. You can't light wood on Shabbat. Don't make a fire. Now, so the implication of this pasuk where it says you can't make a fire in all of your dwellings, b'chol moshvotechem, sounds like your places of living. But not the Beit HaMikdash. It's not your place. It's God's place. That's where you can't make a fire. But the Beit HaMoked, which is not your dwelling place of living, it's God's place. There you could make the fire. Therefore, the rabbis did not forbade you to start the fire before Shabbat there, because even on Shabbat itself, you could go ahead and light the fire, according to this opinion. Meaning, there were certain things that you could do in the Beit HaMikdash on Shabbat. You could go ahead and slaughter an animal on Shabbat, right? Which is one of the malachot of Shabbat. I'm not allowed to slaughter an animal on Shabbat, but in the Beit HaMikdash, which for the korban of the day, the daily offering that was brought in the day, you were able to. The Torah said you could slaughter the animal. We find the Torah says you could do brit on Shabbat. Right? The Torah, we have a teaching that you could do Brit Milah on Shabbat. You could go ahead and circumcise a baby who was born on Shabbat, natural birth, you could circumcise the baby on Shabbat. Sometimes the Torah says you could do certain acts of malacha, of acts, we could save a life on Shabbat, right? There's certain things we're allowed to go ahead and do on the Shabbat. So the Gemara is understanding that here the Torah was suspending, so to speak, the prohibition of making a fire on Shabbat and saying that, you know what, you can make a fire on Shabbat in the Beit HaMikdash. And therefore the rabbi says, what's the problem? You're going to tell me you shouldn't be able, you're going to forbid the guy to make the fire 5 to 8 on Friday afternoon when Shabbat is at 8 o'clock, when sunset is 8 o'clock. There's no problem. What are you afraid? You're going to stoke the coals? You can even make the fire on Shabbat. There's no problem. So the Gemara shoots back. If that's the case, if you really understand that on Shabbat you can make the fire for the wood, for the Kohanim, to keep themselves warm in the Beit HaMikdash, so why, even on Shabbat, you should be able to light the fire for the Kohanim to keep their feet warm? Why does the Mishnah only state that you could go ahead and do it before Shabbat? You could just start the fire for this room, this heating room, just start it before Shabbat, even though it's not the majority of the wood is caught, you're good. Why does the Mishnah only limit your ability to go ahead and do it to before Shabbat? If this drasha, if this exposition of the pasuk, if this is the way you understand the pasuk, that the pasuk is telling you, you're allowed to go ahead and make the fire for the Kohanim on Shabbat. You can make fire in the Beit HaMikdash, even to warm the Kohanim's feet. So why can't we do it on Shabbat? So Rav Chizda disagrees. He says, no, you are not allowed to make a fire on Shabbat to keep David's feet and Joe's feet warm. You can't do that. If the fire went out for any reason, you can't relight the fire on Shabbat in the Beit HaMikdash. Because that is not for the purpose of the Korban. That is for a purpose of keeping the Kohanim warm. Keeping the Kohanim warm is not so to speak, it's not for the Korban purpose, it's not for the offering purposes, it's for the purpose of personal comfort to the Kohanim. And the personal comfort of the Kohanim, that was not something that the Torah said should override the Shabbat. That we want to go ahead and that the Kohanim should be, very comfortable, and therefore we're going to go ahead and even light a fire to keep the Kohanim comfortable. That's not allowed on Shabbat. So what is the pasuk? You cannot make the fire to keep the Kohanim's feet warm. So what is this allowance? What is the pasuk teaching you by saying you can't make a fire on Shabbat in your places of dwelling, but in the Beit HaMikdash would be allowed? So the Gemara says, Elam Rav Chizda Kra Ki Ata, when the pasuk came, Mishrei Evorim Upedarim Hudata. It's referring to, the limbs, the fats of a korban. Let's say you brought the korban on Friday afternoon, right? There's the korban. You brought a korban. There's the tamid. We have the communal offering that we bring every morning and every afternoon. We have two, right? Et hakeves achad taseh b'boker. Et hakeves hasheni, one sheep you bring in the morning, and one you bring what? In the ben arbayim in the afternoon. That's why our prayers, our shachrit, our morning prayers correspond to the morning korban offering. Now afternoon prayers correspond to the afternoon korban. So what happened on Friday afternoon if you were burning the korban on Friday, but all the parts were not completely burnt? So you're allowed to go ahead and burn them Friday night. You can burn them Friday night because this is part of the korban. This is for the purpose of the offering. You're doing it not for personal use. You're burning the fats and the limbs on the mizbeach, on the altar. So that's what the pasuk is telling you. Mishrei varim b'dom b'data. Even though the korban was processed in the afternoon already, and technically the korban was already accomplished its main purpose, but you're still allowed to go ahead and burn those items, and that is the chidush of the pasuk. But therefore, being that's the case, and Kohanim zrizin hein, and the Kohanim are very very careful, and they're very diligent. Because the Kohanim are very diligent, therefore we're not afraid that they're going to go and stoke the coals in this heating room that the Kohanim had from before Shabbat. Now, by the way, also the Arvit, the Gemara says, the night davening, what does that correspond to? It corresponds to these fats and these limbs that were not fully burnt before evening, where you burn them and you at night on the altar. So the night davening, the Arvit, is corresponding to that, and that's a little bit why we, when instituted the Arvit, corresponds to that. Okay, we said ubigvulin kedei shetechos. We said outside the Beit Hamikdash. Outside the Beit Hamikdash, we don't have. It's not the Kohanim. It's not the people that are so diligent. Not everybody's on top of their game, right? In the Beit Hamikdash, the Kohanim are on top of the game. They're all on top of the game, David. They're all diligent. You don't have to worry they're going to stoke the fires. Therefore, you could just start the fire in the heating room, where you would heat up the wood for the Kohanim, and you're good. 5 to 8, night. If sunset was 8 o'clock, 5 to 8 at night, you could go ahead and put on the fires. You could just light the wood a little bit, just start it being lit. Wasn't lit, majority of the wood wasn't lit, you still don't have to worry they're going to do anything. But outside the missions, bigvulin, outside the Beit HaMikdash, now you're dealing with the average person. The average person might not be as careful, and therefore we're afraid he might come to move the wood to make it catch more and elevate a fire, which is one of the 39 melach on the Shabbat. So in order to make sure, Solomon, that the person is not going to go ahead and move the wood to make the fire higher, to increase the fire, so the Mishnah stated it has to catch hold berubo, majority. So now the Gemara is going to explain what does it mean that the majority, what does it mean the majority of the wood has to be caught on fire? My Ruban, Amarav. So now there's a way you could translate rove. You would have thought majority of the wood. If you have 10 pieces of wood, so would it mean 6 pieces have to catch on fire? 6 out of 10, or the sizes. Let's say a certain size of this 10. Let's say all 10 pieces are exactly the same size. So as long as you got a majority of the wood is on fire, 51% of the wood is on fire, you're good to go. Don't have to worry. Is that the meaning? So the first opinion says, no, that's not the meaning. Majority doesn't mean the majority of the wood. Majority means the majority of each and every piece of wood. So if you have 10 pieces of wood on the fire, by the fire, 51% of each and every piece of wood would have to be caught on fire in order that we're not going to be afraid you're going to come stoke the coals. That is the first opinion. My Ruban Amarabba Rov Kol Echad Ve'echad. The majority of each and every piece of wood. Ushmuel Omar, Shmuel says you don't need the majority of each and every piece of wood. Rather, Kedeshu Lo Yomru Havi Eitzim V'naniach Tachtehem. In order, people shouldn't say, you know what, we need to bring some more wood just to make sure that the fire will continue. As long as you reach the point that there's enough, it's on fire enough that nobody's going to say we're going to need additional wood to help keep this fire burning. Sometimes you have a fire, sometimes you say, we got to put some extra, that oil that you spritz into the, whatever you call that, the fuel that you put, to make the fire higher, right? So here in those days, they would be using little piece of wood. So a lot of times, you got to add that the lighter fluid. So as long as you feel you don't need to go ahead and add any, you're not going to call for any more twigs to keep a small piece of wood to keep the fire going, then you are good. So that is, then you don't have to worry, and then you're fine. Tani Rav Chia Lasil Shmuel. Rav Chia learned a support for Shmuel's law. His Braita supports Shmuel. Why? Because it says, Kedei shetehei shal hevet ola me'aleh, that the flame, as long as the flame is strong enough that it'll go up on its own, as long as you don't need anything else to help the flame, that's good enough. So this Gemara is learning, some say, by the way, this week's parasha, Mahalot that Nerot, some learn that referring that this parasha is going on the menorah, that the menorah has to be lit, enough lit that the flame will go up by itself. You don't have to go ahead and help it. You don't need additional things to help the flame. So, but here the Gemara, one way to learn this Gemara is he's learning it regarding this place in the Beit HaMokeh, the heating room, that you have to have enough wood that the flame will go up on its own, that you won't need any additional help. Once you don't need any additional help, so we don't have to worry about your human intervention. You're not going to come to get involved, therefore you're not going to come stoke it on Shabbat. I want to wish everyone a great day. We'll see everyone hopefully tomorrow and more. All the best, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a great day.
Great day, Ronnie. Take care. But we're right. The Torah does not say that you're allowed to desecrate the Shabbat for the comfort. You know what you're supposed to do? Before Shabbat, heat it up. And they even allowed you just even 2 minutes before Shabbat, 5 minutes before Shabbat, because you don't have to worry that the Kohanim are going to come to stoke it. But we want the Kohanim to be comfortable. We got a whole room for you, to have a whole heating room for you. Take care, Saf.